All right, so now we're going to move on to another type of tissue, and so we're going to move on to muscle tissue. Muscle tissue only contains three different types: cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and skeletal muscle. So we're going to be able to do muscle tissue all in one video, so it'll be a little bit better. All right, so we're going to start looking at skeletal muscle. So this picture right here is actually a picture of skeletal muscle, and we can see skeletal muscle pretty well over here. So skeletal muscle is going to be found in your voluntary muscles, right? So your biceps brachii, your triceps, all of those voluntary muscles. So it is voluntary. You can decide when you want to move this. You can control the movement, and it's also what we call striated. So depending on your screen, you may or may not be able to see there are lots of these nice little stripes on this muscle. So we have a light band and a dark band. So these are based on the arrangements of the contractile proteins or sarcomeres within the muscle cells. So these are striped. The A band is the dark colored band, and the I band is the light colored band. So remember that dark has an A in it. That's the A band, is the main dark band. And then I is light, has an I in it. That's the main light band. And so those are the main two that you're going to be able to see here, the dark band and the light band. And we will be doing an activity about this in class. And so the other thing to notice is that these muscle cells are very large. So look, this cell is taking up this, it's bigger than this whole slide. So a muscle cell could actually be like your biceps, the cell can stretch all the way, from the insertion up here on the scapula all the way down, or the origin up here on the scapula all the way down to the insertion on the radius. And so it can be really long cells. And so this is a really long cell. And because it's really long, right, it's going to need multiple nuclei in order to help, repair it and things, as well as there's a lot of proteins in there, and so we need to have lots of ability to repair those proteins. So it is so full of all these contractile proteins, though, that it pushes everything else off to the side. And so we can see these nuclei right here are pushed off to the side. And you can see some nuclei over here that are pushed off to the side. And so the nuclei kind of sit on the side, on top of these cells. And then you can see the striations that are continuing over here. So it's a really long cell with the nuclei that are pushed off to the side, and we can see that it is striated. And so this is a second cell next to it, right? This is another cell next to it. So the muscle cells sit right next to each other. Here's a couple other images of skeletal muscle. So you can see this one is not quite as lined up, but you can see the striations fairly well, and you can see how the nuclei are pushed off to the side, or in this case, we can see them, it's like on the back. And so we're like looking through to see the nuclei on the back ends. And here you can see they're nicely on the side over here, and you can see the striations well on this too. We've got the A band is the dark band, and the I band is the light band. There's another view of skeletal muscle where we can see the striations pretty well, and we can see, once again, they're really long cells, and we can see that these nuclei have been pushed off to the side. Next, these are all longitudinal sections, so we're looking at them like the muscle cells going in long ways, right? Now this is going to be a cross section. And so this cross-sectional view is going to be cutting through the muscle cells like this. So we are looking through a bunch of different muscle cells. So we can see how the muscle cells are, they're roundish, and then the nuclei are pushed off to the outside edges. So these are the little nuclei pushed off to the outside edges. So they're really big, and they're filled with all these contractile proteins. When we look at it this way, we can't see the striations, but you can see how large they are and that they have multiple nuclei. I will likely ask you to identify them based on the longitudinal view, but I did want to just show you what it looks like in cross-section also. All right, the next type of muscle we're going to be talking about is cardiac muscle. So cardiac muscle is found in the heart. Let's go to here, longitudinal section. It's found in the heart, but it is involuntary, right? So you do not have to tell your heart to beat. It does it on its own, which is good, but it is also striated. So if you look really close, it's a little bit harder to tell here, but if you look really close, you can see that there are little stripes. They are not as noticeable here as they could be in other views. And but you can sort of notice that there are little striations over here, little stripes. And then there are some darker bands over here, like this dark area over here is one. We've got some dark areas over here. These are the intercalated discs. And so the other thing we notice is that these are smaller cells. The intercalated discs are showing where the cells are connecting to each other. And each cell has 1 to 2 nuclei, and they branch. So this is not like the best view ever, but you can see there's kind of these cells over here that branch, and they do have some striations and some intercalated discs. And you can see the darker little staining guides with the intercalated discs. And we can see if they're best stained with a different type of stain over here. And so we can see the intercalated discs better in this view. All right, so this is another view of cardiac muscle with a different stain. And so this stain is going to highlight the intercalated discs. So if you see, this would be a good one to view. If you see these really dark intercalated discs that are highlighted with these special stains, and you can also see here, this is pretty good, you can see the striations better on this view of the cardiac muscle. You can see the little stripes, we can see the intercalated discs, and you can see that there's 1 to maybe sometimes 2 nuclei per cell, and they do branch so that each cell is kind of connected to the others around it. And the intercalated discs should be what you're really looking for here. As well as these are smaller cells that have the striations when compared to the skeletal muscle. So these other good intercalated discs. And we can also look at cardiac muscle in cross-section. So you can see that each cell is a lot smaller than the skeletal muscle, and they have usually just the 1 nuclei per. And the cells are, it's hard to tell if they're branching here, but this is, I won't ask you to differentiate between the muscles in cross-section. I'll only ask you in longitudinal, but I figured I'd just bring it up. So this is a good example of cardiac muscle in longitudinal with a special stain that's going to be highlighting the intercalated discs so you can see them really easily. All right, so the last type of muscle we're going to talk about is smooth muscle. All right, and this is a longitudinal section of smooth muscle. So smooth muscle is involuntary, so we're going to find it lining our hollow organs, our blood vessels, our respiratory tract, and our digestive tract, urogenital tract. So we do not have control over it, right? You don't have to think about moving your food down your GI tract all day as you're digesting it. So it's involuntary, and there are no striations. It actually looks pretty smooth right here, so we don't see the striations. And this is because they have a different arrangement of those contractile fibers inside them, and so that they don't like catch the light, I guess, the same way. And so this is smooth muscle, and all of this pink part here is going to be part of the cytoplasm of that smooth muscle, and the purple ones are going to be the nucleus. And so this one can often be confused with dense regular connective tissue, which looks a little bit similar, but the main difference is that you should see the nuclei very evenly distributed throughout here. So there's not going to be really big areas with no nuclei. So with dense regular connective tissue, you'll have a fibroblast and a big area of just collagen fibers, and then you'll have more fibroblasts and then a big area of collagen fibers. Whereas here, each cell should have a nucleus. And so therefore you might have some areas where like the nucleus isn't in view, like it didn't get in the section, but they're usually pretty small, and you should have the nuclei fairly evenly distributed throughout the matrix. And so this is it in longitudinal section, and then this is it in cross section. Once again, you can see they're pretty small, each one, there's a nuclei to each cell. But I will ask you to identify it in longitudinal section. So in review, we have smooth muscle, which is 1 nuclei per cell. It is involuntary and non-striated. We have cardiac muscle, which is 1 to 2 nuclei per cell, and that is striated. And we have these intercalated discs. It is also involuntary. And then we have our skeletal muscle, which is going to be really long cells. They're multinucleated with the nuclei pushed off to the side. They do have these nice striations that we can see, or stripes. The dark band is the A band, the light band is the I band. And then they are voluntary, right? So these are our skeletal muscles that we can voluntarily control. All right, so that's it for our review of cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and skeletal muscle.